we go. And Chloe, I'm going to put the focus on you, right?
Sounds good.
All right. And do you want, let me know when you're ready to start letting folks in.
Oh, what time do you usually give it a couple minutes once
Yeah,
people start trickling
oh
in?
yeah, for sure. Just let me know and I'll start them up.
Okay. If you want to start letting people in, Greg, I can kind of just say, we're going to give it a couple minutes to get started. And by a couple, I mean 1 or 2.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we've got 36 people coming in. Here we go.
Hello to folks who are trickling in. Welcome. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes for a few more folks to join, and we will be starting shortly. Great. I might get started on some of the intro pieces just because I know we've got a lot to get through, and I've got a longer introduction than probably anybody wants. So by the time everybody's joined, then hopefully my introduction parts are done. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. We're really excited to have everybody here and are joined tonight by some very special guests to talk about the idea of basic income and specifically Evelyn Forget and Hanna Owczar's recent book, Radical Trust, Basic Income for Complicated Lives. The past 2 years have really showed us just how urgent conversations about new ways to reimagine income security and address poverty in Canada really are. So we're so excited to see so many of you here tonight, interested in learning more and chatting a little bit about this. So my name is Chloe. My pronouns are she, her. And while we will get into the main event shortly, I am not part of the main event. I'll just kick off tonight with a few introductory pieces. So first off, if you didn't know already, this discussion was organized by Octopus Books, Ottawa's social justice bookstore, and co-hosted with the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa and the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. I'm specifically coming tonight wearing a couple different hats as a board director for the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa, which is a local organization that supports criminalized women and gender diverse folks, as well as the co-chair and co-founder of the Basic Income Canada Youth Network, which is a grassroots group of youth under 35 who advocate for a progressive basic income guarantee. And we'll pop links for some of those organizations, some of those groups in the chat if folks are interested in learning more. I'll do that in a minute, because I cannot multitask. We did want to start this evening by acknowledging that although this is a virtual session and many may be calling in from across Turtle Island, I'm coming to you as a settler on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, which is land colonially known as Ottawa. And this is also where both Octopus Books and eFry Ottawa are located. We are very grateful to be able to gather on this land to learn and share together today, and encourage everyone to take a moment to consider and acknowledge the lands that you're on now and think about approaching tonight's conversation in the spirit of decolonization and reconciliation. In terms of some of the tech pieces for this evening, our friends at Octopus will be managing most of that, but just to share a few things quickly, we have enabled Zoom's automated captioning feature, which is not perfect, but is available to those who may want to use it. You should be able to turn it on or off at the bottom of your screen. And just so everyone is aware, you should have received a notification, but we are recording and live streaming this event to Facebook, so folks who are not able to make it live can have the chance to watch it after. If anybody attending has comments or questions, we definitely invite you to pop them in the chat, or if you're watching on Facebook in the comments. The chat is closed just or your microphones and videos are turned off, but you should be able to communicate in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on any questions, and we'll have time for questions hopefully at the end. So we'll keep an eye on those throughout the conversation. And We'll also just do a quick plug to say that eFry Ottawa hosts a monthly book club called Rebel Reads, where we read and discuss social justice-oriented books on Zoom. So if there are questions that go unanswered, or if you have more that you want to say, we're actually talking about radical trust tomorrow, and anybody's welcome to join. And I will put that link in the chat after as well. So that's basically all for me. I'm going to introduce our moderator, but we thank everyone for a respectful evening and just want it to be a comfortable and welcoming and informative space for everyone joining. So we thank everyone for contributing to that. So now I'd like to introduce the moderator of tonight's discussion, who is Member of Parliament Leah Gazan, and we're so happy to be having her joining us. A bit of a background, Leah Gazan was elected as an NDP Member of Parliament for Winnipeg Centre in October 2019. In August 2020, she introduced Motion 46 in the House of Commons, calling on the federal government to convert the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, into a permanent guaranteed livable basic income. More recently, in December 2021, she introduced Private Members Bill C-223, titled the National Framework for a Guaranteed Livable Basic Income Act. Leah has been organizing in Winnipeg's core for nearly 3 decades and has spent her life working for human rights on the local, national, and international stages. We are so lucky to have her as a dedicated advocate within the basic income movement. And she is also a member of Wood Mountain Lakota Nation, located in Saskatchewan Treaty 4 territory. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Leah, and I will hand it over to you to kick things off.
Well, thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you for the amazing work that you do. Just such a pleasure to be with all of you here today. I know you see the news in the background. Politics never stops in Ottawa, but just wanted to say how honored I am today to join you all to talk about this very important discussion. The importance of finally putting in place a guaranteed livable basic income in Canada. Poverty, as I've very often said, is a very violent human rights violations. There is no reason why anybody in this country should live in poverty. And that's something that I've tried to bring to the House of Commons, including with my current bill, Bill 2C-223, and the very same bill that Kim Pate, also a very well-known guaranteed livable basic income advocate, has also brought to Parliament with her bill S-233. And so I'm really looking forward to, hosting tonight with our honored guests and to talk about how we can advance this cause. I want to let you know that change is really difficult. Passing legislation, particularly through private members' bills, is very difficult, but it is not impossible. And so I just really want to emphasize the importance of this gathering tonight, the importance of all of us working together to push for a guaranteed livable basic income. So enough about me. This is not why we are here. I'd like to take this time now to introduce the book that we will be discussing this evening, Radical Trust, Basic Income for Complicated Lives, exploring the notion that basic income is a compassionate and dignified response to poverty and income inequality in Canada, something that I just named one of the most vile and violent human rights violations. Through extensive testimonies with those that the social safety net, our current social safety net, fails most dramatically. It tells the stories of lived experience as individuals navigate complicated circumstances of their lives. We are so fortunate to be joined by both the authors of Radical Trust this evening, Dr. Evelyn Forget, a personal hero of mine. I'm just putting that out there. And Hanna Oczar, tonight. So I'll start with Dr. Evelyn Forget, certainly a hero, certainly somebody who has guided me in my own work through JLBI. and certainly guided me in the development of the bill, along with Basic Income Canada and Basic Income Manitoba. Dr. Evelyn Forget is an economist in the Rady Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Manitoba. She is a leading voice on basic income research in the world, and she is often called upon by governments, First Nations, and international organizations to advise on poverty, inequity, and health and social outcomes. This year, Dr. Forget was appointed to the Order of Canada for advancing anti-poverty initiatives in Canada and around the world. She was also appointed as the Fellow in the Royal Society of Canada last year. So welcome, Dr. Evelyn Forget, again, a hero of mine. Hanna Owczar is a technical writer at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy. She previously worked with Dr. Forget as a communication specialist in the Rady Faculty of Health Sciences. Hanna holds an undergraduate degree in human rights from the University of Winnipeg and a diploma in creative communications from Red River College. She's also a member of the steering committee on Basic Income Canada Youth Network. Might I add, an outstanding network that is just bringing to light and certainly attention to, you know, the possibilities of a guaranteed livable basic income through a very creative lens. So thanks so much, Evelyn and Hanna, for being here this evening. Want to start off with some questions. I want to start off with a little bit about the background knowledge for those who are attending tonight who may be newer to these conversations. So here's my question. When you say basic income, what are you actually talking about? How did you both come to the idea, and what is your history and experience with it? I think I'll start because I ended off with Hanna. We'll start with Hanna and then we'll follow with Evelyn.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having us here. Thanks to Octopus Books for hosting, to you, Lee Gazan, for moderating. We really appreciate your time. To Chloe from BICYN, and also to the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. So just baseline, what is a basic income? So a basic income is an unconditional cash transfer from governments to individuals to enable everyone to meet their basic needs and participate in society regardless of work status. Similarly to what Leah had mentioned, for me, I see basic income really through a human rights lens. I believe everyone deserves to live a life with dignity. And to me, it's really a common sense alternative to the current social welfare system that is full of lots of gaps and problems. And I think as a society, we just need better solutions to addressing poverty. And for me, basic income makes the most sense. And I came to the concept of basic income through a project I did in school. And I actually was looking at high child poverty rates in Manitoba. And as some of you might know, Manitoba holds the highest child poverty rates in the country. And so through that, I came across the idea of basic income. I didn't know anything about it. And I learned about Manitoba's own pilot project, which is Mincome. And that's how I connected with Evelyn. And I was very, very, very fortunate to have Evelyn hire me after college, and she hired me to write this book. So that's a little bit about me and my knowledge of basic income.
Well, thanks, Hanna, and thanks, Leah, for the kind words, and thank you, everybody, for putting this event together tonight. I think Hannah's exactly right about the definition of basic income. My attraction to the concept really comes from my interest in health. I'm a health economist, and you don't have to spend very long walking the halls of the hospital or visiting in the wards and talking to patients to realize that we're using our healthcare system to address the consequences of poverty. And our healthcare system's not alone. We treat poverty in our jails. We treat poverty through special education classes in our schools. Poverty imposes incredible costs on all of our social programs, and basic income is a reasonable way to address those issues.
Thank you so much to both of you just for the introduction. And I know myself as a longtime anti-poverty advocate, I really do see a guaranteed livable basic income in addition to current and future government programs and supports as a way forward to really creating a better world, a world where people can live in dignity. I have another question for both of you. So, you've answered that. Now I want to move to talking more about your book in particular, starting with the title. I mean, it's a really interesting title. Why did you choose it? And when you chose it, what did you mean by radical trust?
Well, let me tackle that one if I could. I think we had two things in mind when we used that as a title. The premise behind basic income is that individuals and families are the best judges of what it is they need. A basic income allows people to make their own decisions about their own lives, to live their lives the way they want to live. And so it calls upon us to trust people to make those decisions. We don't need experts telling people what it is they need and how they should live their lives. That was the basic premise, but trust really comes into this in a second way too. So much of our social safety net is based on depriving people of dignity, treating them as potential criminals. So much of our system is premised on the notion that people need to be policed to make sure that they're not defrauding the system. And I think that that's an incredibly negative response to people, and it's very inconsistent with the way we deal with income tax, for example, even though we know that income tax fraud by high income people costs the system enough money to pay for the entire social safety net. So I think it really raises a lot of questions about who it is in society ought to be trusted. How do we deal with one another as equals in society?
Thank you so much, Evelyn, or Dr. Forget, and I cannot I agree with you more. I mean, we often penalize the poor, stigmatize the poor with words like lazy, and I often say, Dr. Forget, there's nothing more lazy than looking at a owner or somebody who's a CEO of a corporation sitting on a yacht drinking a cocktail. So, thank you so much. And I agree, it's time that we move to systems that allow people to live in dignity, where they're not penalized and stigmatized, and, deconstruct that system that is punitive and judgmental to a system that really allows individuals to live in dignity and be treated with dignity. Hanna, I want to move it over to you. So we know there's lots of excellent books about basic income. Many have been written by you, Dr. Forget, out there. And, could you both share, I'd like to start with Hanna this time, a bit about how you approached writing this book. It's a very special book. And what makes it different from the others that focus on poverty, income security, and basic income? We'll start with you, Hanna.
Yeah, thanks so much for the kind praise for that. Yeah, when Evelyn and I approached writing this book, it was really important for us to put people with lived experience at the forefront. These are people that we consider and we know are experts. They're folks who have navigated these social systems. They've gone through, complicated transitions in their lives, and they know what is and oftentimes is not working for them. So we hope to really learn from these folks. We wanted to know what they thought could make their lives better. And we weren't just interviewing people who were supporters of basic income either. We were hoping to find anybody who was willing and trustworthy enough to share their experiences with us. And we really are so grateful for the community of supporters that we came to know through this project. And so we weren't necessarily just looking for supporters. We interviewed people in the nonprofit realm, we interviewed community organizers, we interviewed academics. And I think one of the things that stood out to us was that what's currently happening in our social supports and in our welfare systems are just not meeting people's needs. And so that's really what we hope to convey in this book. And we wanted to make sure that people were at the forefront of that. And so each chapter really focuses on sort of a different social issue. And so we have chapters on kids aging out of foster care. We have chapters on transitioning out of the criminal justice system. We have chapters on substance use. And we really wanted to put people first and make sure that their voices were heard and that they were considered to be the experts and knew what they needed and what they didn't need. So that's sort of how we approached that.
That's very powerful, Hanna. And I think, really, having a place for people with lived experience, but just, all people to kind of, give their input on, and their thoughts around guaranteed livable basic income is really powerful. Dr. Forget, did you want to add to that?
I don't have anything to add to that. I think I agree with that. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Forget. So I think we'll move forward. I think I'm going to pass it on to you, Hanna, to introduce the video.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were really fortunate to interview a woman named Amanda Robb, who is with us today. She's on this webinar, so thanks, Amanda, for joining us. And we asked her to send in a bit of a video to describe some of her experiences of living on ODSP, which is Ontario's Social Assistance Program for those living with disabilities. And Amanda herself is a disability advocate and a recipient of ODSP. She lives with multiple medical conditions and has a service dog to support her day-to-day life. And so we're going to play a short video that she generously sent in for us that highlights some of her experiences.
Hello, my name is Amanda Robb, and I was asked to speak to you today about the challenges of being on ODSP and how a basic income would help. For me, the biggest challenge is having to make choices during my monthly budget. I use a budgeting book, and in it, I will put down the costs of my rent, internet, and then roughly put about $100 for dog food and $100 for myself, plus any other payments I know that will be coming out of my account. Then I decide, do I need to get groceries this month, or can I get a pair of pants or shorts instead because mine no longer fit me? So I need to decide between food and clothing. I'll then check my funds to see if I can afford a haircut. Earlier this month, getting my hair done no longer was a luxury but became a medical necessity. I kept overheating, and that kept causing me to go into seizures over and over again. This is something that should never have happened. By the middle of the month, I am incredibly stressed out. I find myself checking my bank account several days in a week, middle of the month, if not several times a day in that week. And that is to see, what can I afford and what will be left at the end of the month? Excuse me. So, how would a basic income help? Well, having a basic income would ensure that I don't need to choose between budgeting in a haircut and my health. It would mean being able to afford clothing and footwear without having to save up for months while cutting back on other necessities. Basic income would ensure that my emergency medication is covered. It is about $14 each time, and sometimes I'm out, sometimes the prescription expires, and so that's $14 again and again, and that is something that I cannot go without. Basic income would also mean that I wouldn't have to pull from my savings account near the end of the year to help pay for my housing insurance. Having basic income would reduce my stress levels and my anxiety. Knowing that I could afford both food, clothing, and footwear, and also have money for unexpected expenses would definitely help me breathe and sleep easier. A basic income would help those of us that are just surviving and pull us up to thriving. Canada needs basic income now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and insight, Amanda. And your example certainly was a powerful example of what a guaranteed livable basic income could mean in so many lives. And the fact that, you know, the things that you brought forward, these are basic necessities to live, and nobody should ever be in a position where they have to choose between food, rent, medication, clothes, or even footwear, which is why, you know, I know Hanna, both Hanna and Dr. Forget are talking about is a guaranteed income in addition to current and future government programs and supports. You really make it clear that it's time for a guaranteed livable basic income. Moving on with both you and Hanna and Dr. Forget, for the next question, I'm curious about what surprised either of you while writing Radical Trust, or whether there was a moment or story you found most impactful. At this time, I'll start with you, Dr. Forget.
I don't think I was surprised by any of the stories I heard, but I was really taken aback by the relentlessness of the challenges that people faced. I think that it's very difficult for people who live in very comfortable circumstances, very fortunate circumstances, to put ourselves in a position where we're constantly bombarded by new challenges and new things that we have to deal with. When we began writing this book, we sort of naively decided we were going to divide it into chapters, and the chapters would be kids aging out of care, women dealing with violence, homelessness, and so on. But as soon as you start talking to somebody, the story is about aging out of the foster care system. And before you know it, you're talking about homelessness, you're talking about substance use, you're talking about exploitation in all kinds of ways. And I was really taken aback by the inability to find your feet and to get ahead of these challenges coming forward.
Yeah, that's really powerful, to look at things in compartments and realizing that it really is a circle and one thing impacts the other. Hanna, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, going off of what Evelyn said, I think in addition to that, just looking at people's resilience as well, in all of these different things that people go through. And I think the pandemic has showed us that, none of us are immune to these challenges. Some of us face different consequences depending on where we were born, the parents who raised us. But especially with COVID, I mean, losing your job, it said that, any of us are 3 paychecks away from poverty or from homelessness. And so I think that that's what we're hoping to convey in this book also, is that these aren't, everyone has their own story and no one is at fault for their circumstances. So I would say that was something that struck me in the book, in addition to our chapter on substance use and basic income. And I really encourage you all to obviously read the book, but specifically the chapter on substance use, because I went into that chapter having a lot of the same preconceived notions like a lot of people do about substance use, and looking at, would it feed people's addiction? Would it cause more harm to people? And I think what we learned was that income is never proven to be the cause of substance use. People will use substances no matter their income, but where a basic income can make a difference is along the path to recovery. And we spoke to people with lived experience and a lot of advocates within the space who talked about difficulties in finding publicly funded treatment facilities, detoxing options, and how a basic income allows people to choose recovery in their own ways, and it can serve as a harm reduction tactic as well. So I think that was one of the things that struck me most in writing and researching for this book.
Yes, 100%, Hanna. And, I often, think about, people often liken individuals that are living in poverty as lazy. And I always say, I think the hardest job is being poor. Where am I going to sleep? What am I going to eat today? How am I going to survive? It's a full-time job being poor. It's one of the hardest jobs. And, I'm glad that your book looks at, different, things that often result in people becoming poor, but that your analysis is certainly interconnected, that, we have to look at total systems change, guaranteed livable basic income being one of those changes to make sure that people are cared for and can, again, not just survive, but thrive. So I just want to mention before we go any further that tonight's event was co-hosted by the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa. It's a feminist abolitionist organization that provides support to criminalized women and gender diverse people in the Ottawa area. One of the chapters actually in your book tells of a story of Vinnie Little, or Vinnie Lilly, and his experience reintegrating into society after nearly 15 years of involvement with Manitoba's justice system, and that included incarceration. We don't often hear about basic income through this lens. So my question is, what is the relationship between poverty and criminalization, and what might a basic income mean for those at risk of or previously involved in the justice system? We'll start with you, Dr. Forget, for this one.
Well, I probably don't have to repeat in this company the sort of well-worn statistic that 80% of incarcerated women are there for poverty-related crimes. I think, I mean, you asked me a minute ago what surprised me. And I said that none of the stories surprised me, but actually one thing did. I was really struck by how vulnerable many people are when they are trying to rebuild their lives after incarceration. People who've spent so much of their lives institutionalized in group homes, in foster care, in prisons, often have never learned the most basic skills to protect themselves from people who would exploit them, people who would take advantage of them. And I think that this was one chapter that makes it very clear that basic income is it's not the entire social safety net, it's part of the social safety net. And so many other services are necessary for people going forward. But I think what a basic income does is it lets people find their feet, so to speak. It lets people work on their own issues. Many people are not in any position to be working in the paid labor market immediately after incarceration. And I think what a basic income does is it gives people the time and the space to work on some of their own issues before they have to find a job and struggle to put food on the table, so to speak. And so I think a basic income is really, really essential in that context.
I agree 100%, Dr. Forget. Hanna?
Yeah, the Basic Income Canada Youth Network right now, which was mentioned, I'm on the steering committee. We're actually working on a brief right now linking basic income and criminalization. And so what we've discovered in that research and also through writing this book is that basic income can make a difference in quite a few ways. So first, it could serve as an important form of income support for those involved in the justice system who are looking to reintegrate or reintegrating into society. Basic income would also contribute to individual and household stability, which is very much an important step in reducing crime rates in the first place. And basic income may also facilitate the decriminalization of poverty. We know that low-income communities are much more under scrutiny of police. And we see all the time how our current social safety nets contribute to criminalization and how police are often used to support some of the failings of our social support systems, namely how we deal with mental health issues. So I think what basic income can really do is provide people the ability to meet their basic needs and help them just get a step up and a form of stability in their lives. While they're reintegrating and involved in the justice system, and not to mention that it's needed to fulfill a lot of the reconciliation objectives from the TRC, recommendations from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report, as well as recommendations of the UN Working Group of Experts on Individuals of African Descent. So there's quite a few national and international conventions that call upon basic income as a form of a way to reduce criminalization.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hannah, and also thank you so much for bringing up the National Inquiry, and certainly 4.5 of the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Women and Girls that specifically calls on the need for a guaranteed livable basic income as a way to mitigate the ongoing genocide, not just for Indigenous women and girls, but the need for a guaranteed livable basic income for all peoples. Many of us in this movement constantly come across concerns about stereotypes associated with basic incomes and those living in poverty. For instance, a lot of people say a basic income is too expensive. We've heard that a million times. That it would come at the expense of important public services, even though even bills like mine say, in addition to current programs and future supports. That people living in poverty are somehow deserving of their circumstance, or that it's giving people free money that causes everybody to stop working. Thank you for bringing up those stereotypes. I often say, let's instead of talking about the high cost of a guaranteed livable basic income, let's start talking about the high costs of poverty. So, to both of you, we'll start with you this time, Hanna. How did you deal with or challenge these or other issues in the book?
Yeah, so we do not believe basic income is the sole solution here. We believe that it needs to be in complement with a lot of other important public services. So we're looking at things like affordable and sufficient housing, universal childcare, pharmacare, addition to healthcare, all of that stuff. So we want to make it clear that we don't see basic income as a solve. We think it's important to have it complement all these other important social services. And there's a lot of basic income pilots worldwide, but even specifically in Canada, and Evelyn can talk about her research on income, that have really promising results that debunk a lot of those myths about basic income. So even recently in Ontario, there was a pilot project that the Ontario Basic Income Pilot was implemented in 2017. Unfortunately, it was prematurely canceled 10 months later with a change in government. But nonetheless, there were some really incredible results that came out of that from academics and researchers, and a lot of lived experience stories came out of that. And so what was found was that most participants spent basic income on basic needs like food, housing, clothing. People reported that basic income helped them go back to school. They were able to find better employment. And many actually started businesses as well. And people felt overall healthier. They experienced improvements in mental health. So I think we really need to look at reframing basic income as an expense, and we need to reframe it into an investment, and it's an investment in people. And we know that it works. There's been pilot projects all over the place that prove this. And I can hand it over to Evelyn to kind of talk a little bit more about her work with income and what she's seen.
The evidence is out there. I think that there's a tremendous amount of evidence out there. We know that Canada can afford a basic income. The Parliamentary Budget Officer knows that Canada can afford a basic income. The evidence is out there that basic income is essential, that it helps people, it's an investment, it's a very, very positive thing. But I think that there are sort of two ways to address these issues. You can recite the evidence, you can do it over and over and over again, and it tends not to speak to people. And that's, to some extent, why we wrote this book. I think essentially you've hit the nail on the head. What do people deserve? What do people deserve? Who deserves support and who doesn't? This is really an old stereotype. It goes back to Elizabethan England. Who deserves support and who doesn't? There is this notion out there that some people are just not worthy. If people are living through hard times, they've brought those hard times on themselves. That the difficulties that people find themselves are the result of their own bad decisions and their own bad choices. And I think what we tried to do in this book is to profile people. And I think the people we profiled tell a very different kind of story. They tell a story of resilience. They tell a story of hard work. They tell a story of bad luck and bad breaks, but also of hardships confronted and overcome. And I think that that's what we were trying to do in that book, to gather it all together, to say, yeah, we've got the evidence. We can tell you about the statistics. I mean, we've We've analyzed this 18 ways to Sunday. We know that people don't stop working if they receive a basic income. We know we can afford it. We've got the answers to all of that. But really, it's the people who are telling a different story here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Forget. If only people would actually make decisions based on research and based on, and in fact, upholding, constitutional obligations, which includes our charter that's supposed to ensure that all people live with dignity and security. We don't do that yet in Canada, for sure. And I certainly see that in my riding, the third poorest riding in the country. So thank you for that. So we're coming now to the last question of the evening. I want to look now a little bit at the bigger picture. Things have changed a lot in the past few years when it comes to discussions around income security in this country. Where do you see the public debate right now when it comes to basic income, and how has the COVID-19 pandemic influenced this? And then in addition to that, what do you both see as next steps, including potential action for folks here tonight, so that we can move this movement? We'll start with you this time, Dr. Forget, and then we'll end off with you, Hanna.
Well, I think the pandemic's been a really, really interesting time for basic income. I think that it showed dramatically that the social safety net we have in place is not adequate. We can recognize that, and in fact, the reason we had the CERB in the first place was because employment insurance couldn't do the job. The programs that were there were not adequate. So we recognized the limitations of what we had. We recognized the people falling through the gaps. But the other thing that happened with COVID is that we recognized how much change could happen and how quickly it could happen when there's a political will to make those changes. So I think that one of the reasons people are talking about basic income now is because we've seen what's possible. And I think that there are many things to learn. I don't think that the decisions that were made during the pandemic were necessarily the ideal decisions, but I think that there were a lot of things that we can learn from what happened. And moving forward, I think that that's tremendously important. I'm not sure what else to add to that. I'll maybe pass that on to Hanna and let her continue.
Thank you, Dr. Forget. Hanna?
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about the future of basic income. I think that, like Evelyn said, the pandemic has really changed the discussion in Canada. And not to mention that there's quite a few new voices that have emerged in support of the idea. So I love to talk about how the Pope now supports basic income. The Steelworkers Union came out in support, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. There was a bunch of religious groups that also support the concept. Women's groups, artists, there's really growing awareness and support about this. But I think ultimately, there needs to be political leadership and political will. And I think, specifically what you, Leah, are doing is really important. And I think what Kim Pate is doing is really important in bringing these bills into a public forum. And also, not to mention all the national groups that are advocating for this, Coalition Canada, the Basic Income Canada Youth Network, Basic Income Canada Network, UBI Works, all of these groups are really working together to push the idea and to gain support. And I think that's really positive. In terms of next step actions, I mean, talk to your MLAs, talk to your MPs, tell people you agree with this, talk to people, going through these transitions, learn from them, talk to your neighbors. I think that there's a lot that still can be done, but I think ultimately it's growing, and I'm optimistic about the future.
Yes, and what a wonderful way as we come to the end of our discussion tonight, Hanna. And, I think sometimes people forget how powerful they are as individual people. But, never underestimate your own power. And I think our collective power, and certainly the collective power of the basic income movement, organizations and anti-poverty advocates from across the country are sending a clear message. So I just want to thank you so much, Hanna and Evelyn. We're coming to the closing of our discussion this evening. What a fantastic conversation. And thank you so much for your book. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you, Chloe. We were joined earlier by Chloe, who's also a tremendous advocate for guaranteed livable basic income. And I cannot say enough how much Radical Trust is such a great resource to us in the basic income movement, but also for people who just want to learn about the concept. What is everybody talking about? I just want to do a shout out. I know that there's a new basic income fundraiser, or I guess education raiser, selling swag. I'm getting my swag tomorrow, and I plan to wear it. I got a sweatshirt and 2 t-shirts. It'll be my new daily wear in support of a basic income. So thank you once again. And thank you for giving me the privilege and honor of hosting tonight. So now I'll turn things back to Chloe for the audience Q&A. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leah, and to you, Hannah and Evelyn, for this great discussion. And also, I don't know if I've been on a Zoom webinar during COVID-19 where we said we'll have time for questions at the end, and we've actually had time for questions at the end. So this is very exciting. But yeah, thank you so much for the discussion so far and for writing this book. And something that you said, Evelyn, which struck me, I think. There's so much data out there on basic income. We have so many numbers and some of that like really hard data to point to, and that evidence that I think is really important in moving things along. But for a long time, I think the sort of the qualitative pieces, the stories, has just not been really what's been brought to the forefront, and it's really incredible. And I think definitely what Leah said, a value. Really valuable both to folks who are interested in learning more about basic income, but also for the movement and people who want to show that this is something that would have impacts in the lives of real people. It's not just something that is numbers on paper. So thank you both so much for doing this work, and to everyone who was involved in the discussion. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat that I think some of them are coming right to me, and I'm keeping track of them. So I'll throw some of these out there at folks and see what you think. And if people have more questions, please put them in the chat. We've still got quite a bit of time to talk more. But maybe I'll start with a question from Elaine, who is wondering if both of you could comment on the pros and cons of implementing a basic income just for people with disabilities, which is something that is currently being proposed, and there's been some movement on for folks who don't know. Some people suggest that it would be easier to do this first and then move to implementing a basic income for everybody later on. So do either of you have thoughts on that or anything to add to that discussion?
Yeah. Evelyn, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think it's wonderful that that there is at least movement on a basic income for people with disabilities. I think it's sorely needed, and I think that will be beneficial. I worry a little bit that it's politically easier to address a basic income for people with disabilities than for working age adults. And so I think it's really important to keep the pressure on our politicians to let them recognize that this is only half the picture. And I think it's a good half. I think it's important to move ahead, but I think it's important to go beyond a basic income just for people with disabilities. I think one of the, if I can just, one of the difficulties that people face is that there are many people who have difficulty qualifying for disability supports. People with disabilities who are not recognized as having disabilities. A general basic income would provide supports for people who have difficulty maintaining jobs and yet don't qualify for disability supports. If we're providing a basic income only for people with disabilities, then there's still the problem of qualification for that program.
Thank you so much. Did you have anything to add, Hannah?
Yeah, I think I think what Amanda had said in her video was really important, and her experience is living on ODSP. I don't want to speak too much for her because I know she's here tonight. But I think that something else to mention is that also people require a lot of other medical needs and expenses that are now incorporated into income support programs. So I think it's important to have a lot of dialogue with people who are living with these services to make sure that there isn't any loss of support. That's not something that we would advocate for. Right now, the income levels that people who are living on ODSP or on social assistance are incredibly low. They're not livable. Like Amanda was saying, she's needing to make really tough choices every month as to what she can afford. Especially with a service dog, that's an added expense, but it's necessary for her ability to live day to day and live an independent life. And it's shocking that some of these services aren't covered, but there also are others that are covered. And so we want to make sure that when we have conversations about basic income, that we're making sure that there isn't any loss of important medical assistance. And maybe there's some movement on it. The federal government did announce the disability benefit and some announcement at some point in the last 2 years, which has really fallen off the radar. So I think it's important, again, like Evelyn says, is just to really push that political support, because it seems like there might be some movement there, but it's going to require maybe a little bit of a push to make sure that that comes to fruition.
Yeah, thank you so much both. And I've been informed in the chat. I did not realize that people could only send questions to me and to the other host of the event. So thank you for, thank you for that. So I've got a bunch of questions kind of coming in now, and a couple, I think, just helpful comments and FYIs. Somebody was asking about book club guides for your book, and there is actually questions for readers at the end, which I did not notice when I read it, and I'm hosting book club tomorrow. So we'll be going back to those questions because they look really, really great. Also have somebody talking about how important it is to keep an eye on what's going on in PEI right now for folks who are interested in moving this work forward. Actually, maybe, what's going on in PEI? Is there perhaps some political parties there who are supportive? I don't know.
Evelyn's involved in that.
Is that a question? So is Chloe. All three, both government, opposition, and the third party and PEI, provincial parties are all very supportive of a basic income and really interested in moving it forward with the support of the federal government. And there is a petition in the House of Commons right now, and I'll pop the link to that in the chat in a moment. Somebody is asking, okay, so we have folks who are actually, I think, involved in the movement and kind of looking to get more involved, but curious how you would suggest we advocate on promoting basic income in our communities going forward. So maybe hearing some more community-based advocacy and what individual folks can be doing.
Yeah, I think that's really important if you want to get more involved. I think there's some really good resources on some of the national basic income groups. I know that for the youth group, we've come out with a couple, fill in the blanks form letters if you're interested in emailing your MP or your MLA, but don't feel necessarily like you have all the information to do so. So I know that there is some, maybe Chloe can do some magic in the chat, and maybe you'll have some of those resources in. But I just think talking to your peers, I have made all of my friends and family become basic income advocates, maybe against their wishes, but I talk about it constantly. And I was learning this as I went too. Evelyn is the, all-time queen of basic income, as much as she's humble about it. But I was just learning from scratch too. I came out of college, I had an anti-poverty lens. I was aware of a lot of issues, but basic income wasn't something that I knew a lot about, and I was intimidated by it at first. And Evelyn said, let's go write this book. And I said, why me? I don't know what I'm doing. But as I wrote it and as I learned about it, there's a lot of great resources out there, and I became a huge advocate for it, and I just talk everyone's ear off about it. So maybe bringing it to, your book clubs, or bringing it to your church groups, or bringing it to your dinner parties, may help, sway a few of your friends and family too. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Evelyn.
I think that's right. I think that there are organizations in virtually every province at this point that you can connect to if you want a formal connection, but I think it just really is important. I've been actually shocked by the number of people who knock on my door or phone me up and want to tell me about basic income. They have no idea who I am, but basic income is really important. And so I mean, I got a call from a potential provincial NDP candidate just the other day who was trying very hard to sell me on the idea of basic income. So, I mean, I think it's wonderful out there that there are all kinds of people who are really interested in basic income. Some need to know more about the project. They need to be directed to the resources we have. But yeah, make the connections and make the connections in the other groups you're attached to as well. Whatever local groups you belong to. People are interested, I think, and I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, I think the thought of calling Evelyn Forget and being like, have you heard of this thing called a basic income is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. But I think the point about involving other local groups, it's one of those things that I think isn't on as many people's radars as, I mean, I think we're biased that it should be, but once you start talking about it with folks, it becomes pretty clear to people, even if they're working on tangential issues like criminal justice or food security, that all of a sudden aren't that tangential, and people realize pretty quickly, like, actually how relevant this is to the work that they do. A lot of folks kind of asking for maybe some guidance or your thoughts on some of the like designy pieces of a basic income, which I think we all know are tricky, but some questions around like, how much should a basic income be? Should it be opt-in or opt-out? How often would payouts or should payouts be? And, I think we all know that these are decisions that are, probably none of us are going to be making, but any thoughts on what those should be?
I'm going to give Evelyn the seat on that one, the economist.
I have all kinds of opinions on that, but I mean, I think that these are issues that we are discussing. I mean, everybody's discussing in all of our different groups and all of our different organizations. There are some basic principles, right? Nobody should be living in poverty in this country. It is not necessary for people to be living below the poverty line. And so I think that's a goal. A guaranteed livable income is what we're aiming at. How often? Well, people need money on a regular basis. It needs to be predictable. So those are the kinds of principles that I think that people have in mind. The precise way it's going to be delivered, I think, is a question that will probably be left to bureaucrats of all kinds to ultimately make. But I mean, I think those are the questions that people are talking about.
Yeah, and there's been some really good studies done by Basic Income Canada Network. And they did a costing of a basic income, and that was a really important resource too. So if anybody is really curious about like nitty-gritties in terms of what it's going to cost and how it could be implemented, I think they offer about 3 options for a basic income approach. So that's something worth checking out too if you're interested more in that.
Awesome. I think this is probably, maybe this won't be the last question because it feels like not the happiest maybe to end on, but someone's wondering about who the opponents generally of basic income are and why, kind of what's that opposition grounded in, and are they telling the truth? So what's the kind of scope of opposition for basic income is kind of the question there.
I think that there's support for basic income right across the political spectrum, but I also think that there's opposition to basic income right across the political spectrum. I think the right-wing support is easy to understand. Politically, there are many people who will argue that if people desire a livable income, they should work for it. And on the political left, I think it's a little bit more challenging. People do worry about whether basic income is going to mean the curtailment of other social programs. I don't think so. I mean, I think that most supporters of basic income fully understand that basic income is a part. It's not a replacement for the social safety net. I think that is something that we need to work on going forward.
Yeah, and I will say that I think that the conversation has become more divisive even with the pandemic too, which is unfortunate because I think that, a lot of this is all of it's supported by research, it's supported by pilot projects that have been put in place, but I think people hold some pretty strong opinions about, you're not going to work. People just need to get up and work. But time and time again, there's evidence to prove that this is not the case. that it won't necessarily impact, you know, one of the questions I'd asked Evelyn when I first started is, you know, how about small businesses? How about, you know, rising costs and all of that? And that's never been proven. And yeah, I think that hopefully with more awareness and more resources out there, you know, we can continue to try to push down those negative stereotypes. But I agree with Evelyn. I think that there's support across all parties, and there's also going to be not support across all parties for a variety of reasons.
Just let me plug the book a little bit. We do address most of these topics in the book, so you'll find resources cited that lead you further if you're interested.
Which is an excellent place to end. And I clearly don't moderate Q&As regularly because I don't think you're supposed to end on what's the opposition question. But we are just kind of coming up on time, and there are other questions that have come in, but we're right at the hour and want to respect people's time. But it is a great book. And if you haven't read it, you should. You can purchase it at Octopus Books. You can also purchase it at lots of other places, I think. But if you're in Ottawa, you should buy it at Octopus Books, and kind of touches on all of these questions and more. And Evelyn has also written several other books about basic income that get at some of these questions as well. We are truly among experts here, but really and truly thank you to both of you for joining and for being willing to participate in this discussion and for letting us kind of pick your brains about the topic and through the lens of this book in particular. And I know both of you spend a lot of time talking about basic income, but kind of getting to do it on this corner of Zoom was definitely a gift this evening. So really appreciate it. And also absolutely thank you so much to you, Leah, for moderating this evening, and Amanda, to you for sending in that really amazing video and sharing your experience as well. So if your interest is piqued, if you want to learn more about some of what was touched on tonight, read more about the experiences of some of the folks who basic income might fundamentally and dramatically change their lives, and in what ways. You can buy Radical Trust, you can read it. There's a question guide. You can join our book club and chat about it tomorrow, the E-Fry Book Club. And if you want to get involved with advocating for a basic income, there are groups across the country. You don't need to be involved with the group by any means. You can do it individually, contact your MP, but there are also national, provincial, municipal groups who are connected and working really hard to move this forward. And also, of course, thanks to the support and advocacy of people like Leah Gazan and Kim Pate. So thank you so much to everybody, for our authors, for our amazing speakers, for our moderator, our co-sponsors, and hope you all have an amazing evening.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.